Thank you so much for that opening, and thank you for being here with us. And welcome to all of you who are joining us today. If we can go to the slides. So we would like to hear from you all now. So if you can, please share in the chat with us your name, where you are joining from, and what brings you to the space. Again, if you can share your name, where you are joining from, and what brings you here to this space with us today. And as people start answering, if you can just notice who's here with you. And we want to welcome you all.
And for folks who weren't here for the tech instructions, you can just click on your Zoom menu at the bottom, both the participants menu and the chat menu, and that will open up those to right.
So if we can move to the next slide. So my name is Joe Talbert, and again, I'm the Strategy Clinics and Circles Coordinator here at People's Hub. And People's Hub is an online movement school that connects with groups across geographies to support healthy group culture to build more powerful and thriving movements. So if we can go to the next slide. We do this through our Thriving Group series. If you can back up a slide. There we go. We do this through our Thriving Group series, which helps build an organization's organizational culture and health. We do that through our People's Hub workshops, which are led by movement leaders from across the world. We do that through circles like this one and strategy clinics, which we will be engaging in a little bit later. So if we can go to the next slide. So I'm your host today, and our moderator for our conversation is Tamara, who is co-editor of the book, Climate Justice, Community Renewal, Resistance and Grassroots Solutions, which is the inspiration for this Circle series. And we have some amazing guests that will be speaking today. If we can go to the next slide. We have Amy Norman from Labrador Land Protectors. And we have Ninawa, who you heard from just a second ago, who opened up the space for us. We can go to the next slide. We have Alexis Latham, Winnie Overbrook, and Tom Goldtooth, who you will be hearing from. And I would like to thank our sponsors for this session. And I think one of them is on Kazimbe from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. If you wanted to say anything, I just wanted to give you the time to do so.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Joe, and thank you to everyone here on the call today. On behalf of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung New York office, we are happy to be joined today with the Institute for Social Ecology, along with People's Hub, to present this very exciting panel discussion. Obviously, at this time, right now, of great turmoil, it's important to look back and to be able to look forward. And so we're looking forward to learning more from the lessons of original struggles for environmental justice. Just for a quick, brief explanation, the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung is an internationally operating policy institute affiliated with the Left Party of Germany. Our New York office works primarily with folks in Canada and the United States, and acting as a bridge between progressive actors and activists in North America and those folks in Europe. We also do a lot of work alongside our comrades in the Global South, particularly around issues of environmental justice, racial justice, and trade unions and energy democracy. If you want more information about the organization, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. We have plenty of publications online for free, in addition to many of the workshops online workshops we also offer. I'm looking forward to a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I'm really happy to be a part of it. And if you have any more, if you want more information about the foundation, please feel free to send me a chat. I'll drop my email into the chat as well. Thank you so much, Joe. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kazembe. And I would also, again, like to thank the University of Tennessee Department of Sociology and Global Studies program and the Institute for Social Ecology. So we can stop the screen share for now, and I'm gonna turn it over to Tamara, who's gonna give us our framing for today and our agenda overview.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Kazembe. Thank you, Ninawa. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. This is very exciting. And so the purpose of the series, there are five meetings that we're doing every 2 to 3 weeks, is to basically create space for the authors that wrote wonderful chapters in this book that Brian Tokar and myself co-edited, and also to sort of open up various themes. So please, sign up for the rest of them. They're free. We really just want people to get involved and for the authors of the book to have a space to talk about their work. Today we're focusing on Indigenous resistance and just transition. And, Indigenous people are the front lines of resistance to climate change and environmental struggles. Frontline defenders came out recently with the numbers for human rights defenders who were assassinated in 2019, and 40% of the assassinations were Indigenous peoples, campesinos, and environmental defenders around the world. Indigenous peoples are on the front line of dealing with extractive industries like coal, oil, and gas, as well as dealing with plantations like palm oil and eucalyptus, and large-scale industrial projects and energy projects like mega dams. So today we're going to hear about mega dam projects that have impacted Indigenous communities in Labrador. Then with Alexis Latham and Amy Norman. And then after that, we're going to hear from Vinnie Overbeek and Ninawa Hunihui, who's going to talk about resistance in Brazil, specifically around conservation programs that are impacting Indigenous land rights and Indigenous sovereignty, specifically projects that are supposedly for the climate. And then Tom Goldtooth will take us home talking about Indigenous just transition and many, many, many incredible projects and proposals that the Indigenous Environmental Network are working on. So I will stop there. And also just one quick thing, the book is available for 50% off, and you should have the code if you want to have a look at it and read it. So thank you all so much. Thank you to People's Hub and Joe and Kazembe and everyone involved, the University of Tennessee, ISE, Rosa Lux, and everybody for pulling this together, and all the tech people who are keeping this going. Thank you so much. So we'll turn it over to Alexis and Amy. So go ahead and take it from here. Alexis, we don't hear you.
Oh,
there you go.
You can hear me? You can hear me now? Okay. Yes. So I apologize. I had some technical problems and I haven't fixed the name on the screen there. So thank you all for coming, and it's an honor to be here, and I'm so glad that we have Amy Norman here to talk about her incredible struggle that her community has had over this massive dam project at Muskrat Falls. My connection to this issue goes way back to 1994. I was newly living in Vermont when the state was entering into negotiating a contract with Hydro-Quebec, and it was directly tied to building a new dam project on the Innu land, which they call the Tassanan. And I got drawn into that struggle and have been, ever since. That was just one dam. Unfortunately, it was built. And then, that was not the first dam on the Innu land. It was actually the 19th. The dam started in Hydro-Quebec started building dams. This is all on rivers that the Indigenous people were using at the time that had very, very deep ties to these rivers and these forests. And it was just one dam after the next, beginning in the 1940s, and it continues to this day. And so the point that I want to make right now is just that what is happening in this area to Indigenous communities, to the forests and the rivers, is because of the pressure that is coming from the northeastern United States, which just has this enormous energy needs. And right now it is the northeastern states, Massachusetts, New York City, who are all looking to meet their renewable energy portfolios by importing this so-called clean energy. And the more that this region imports electricity, the more pressure there's going to be to build more dams, and there are plans to build many more dams. So we should keep in mind that, when we talk about renewable energy, what people have in mind is wind and solar. But actually 70% of the so-called renewable energy in the world comes from hydropower. And the estimate is that over the next 25 years, most of the vast majority of new so-called renewable energy is going to come from hydropower. So we're entering into a whole new era of just major development of new mega dams on rivers, wherever there are still free-flowing rivers. And most of those areas are areas that where Indigenous communities are living. So that's kind of the context for what's this struggle over Muskrat Falls, and I will turn it over to Amy to talk about that. Thank you.
Nakamik, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Norman. I'm an Inuk woman from Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador, which is in northeastern part of Canada, east of Quebec. I do have some slides, so whenever they show up, we'll get to that. Here we go. So I'm going to quickly talk about why I'm against the Muskrat Falls Mega Dam. This is a mega dam that's it's about 30 kilometers upstream from where I am right now. So, 15, 20 miles, I'm not quite sure. Next slide, please. So yeah, like I said, I'm Inuk, which is the singular word for Inuit. So that's the circumpolar Indigenous people. My family ties are to Northwest River and Nain and Nunatsiavut. And I've been working with the Labrador Land Protectors since 2016. This is kind of like a grassroots organization that sprung up in our community when the resistance to the mega dam reached a boiling point. So it really mobilized, hundreds and hundreds of people in a very small town. And from that came this group called the Labrador Land Protectors that I'm a part of. Primarily, I focus on issues around Indigenous rights and impacts on Inuit culture and way of life, because I think those are the two most important issues in terms of how this mega dam in my backyard, you know, is impacting my people and, you know, the Inuit cultures around me too. So, but that's all that's to say, there is a lot of other issues that come with mega dams, but I'm going to be focusing mostly today on the two big ones that I see. So next slide, please. So I want to talk about methyl mercury. This is an issue that kind of drove the resistance movement, because there was a study that came out in 2016 with the Harvard School of Public Health and the Nunavut government, which is the Inuit self-government of Labrador, talking about methyl mercury contamination in relation to the big mega dam, the Muskrat Falls Dam. Methyl mercury is a harmful neurotoxin. It can cause all kinds of devastating health problems. You can see there memory issues, developmental issues. And it's formed when the naturally occurring mercury that's in all vegetation is submerged in water. So when you have these giant mega dams and they don't clear the vegetation from the reservoir, all of the trees and the soil and the mosses, when they're submerged, all the natural mercury methylizes into the harmful methyl mercury form. You can switch slides, please. So this is particularly harmful to us as Inuits because of our traditional diet. We rely on really fatty foods. So when you think of like seal and you know, that kind of really rich food, because methyl mercury bioaccumulates in fat. So this graphic here, you can see how the mercury in the water, the plankton, like affects the plankton, and then the smaller fish eat the plankton, and then the larger fish, and then the seals. We eat the seals. That's, you know, who we are. We're seal people. And because it builds up and builds up and builds up like that, it disproportionately affects Inuit. So, you know, not only like it's an issue in and of itself, but it's going to disproportionately impact us because of our way of life, and it's going to harm our way of life. Do the next slide, please. Because we still rely on hunting and fishing and harvesting. This is a picture of me and my nephew out fishing last year. You know, our traditional diet is one of the only good sources of healthy food in the North, because food prices are just so, you know, ridiculously high. We can't depend on store-bought food. We have to rely on the land like we always have, and that's who we are. And not only does our country foods, our fish, our seals, it nourishes us, you know, physically, it's great food, but it's also nourishing us spiritually. It's our connection to our culture. It's who we are. It's not just a meal. It's, you know, it nourishes the spirit. So when our food webs, you know, our link to our food webs is being severed by these dams in our backyard, that's cutting us off from our culture. Our diet, but our culture. Next slide, please. So what I say to folks, because I've done a few presentations down in what's currently known as the United States, if your state is purchasing hydropower from Canada, that makes you complicit in what's happening to my people. Next slide, please. To go to another, you know, the other side of the coin with the same issues, there's a lot of, you know, impacts on Indigenous rights. We see a lot of over-criminalization of land and water protectors. So I myself, I've been charged and arrested twice. There's been over 70 of the Labrador land protectors who have been charged and arrested, including arresting elders. They sent some elders to maximum security prison over 1,000 kilometers from home. They sent Inuit grandmother to a maximum security men's prison. They arrested the young Inuk woman violently in the middle of the night. And then the officer that arrested her later won an award for good community policing. So, you know, all of these issues that we've been talking about lately with the Black Lives Matter movement and police brutality. We see that here too, and it's you know, it's all connected. And so some of us are still being dragged through the courts. I am lucky in that my charges were dropped, but others not so much. Some are still facing civil charges, some are still facing criminal charges. And we have a link there at the bottom for our fundraising page. So thank you for, if you want to just grab that. And I'll post the links later in the chat too as well. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Bart, for putting that there. This is a quick slide to go over some very bullet points, some other issues that that come up when we're talking about mega dams. And I do want to mention too that, you know, I'm talking about my perspective and my experience with the Muskrat Falls Dam and what I've faced through, you know, our land defense movement here, but it's not unique to us here. Every single mega dam, I think worldwide, will face similar issues. That's just the nature of these massive, large-scale dams. So yeah, anything I'm talking about, though I am referencing my own personal story, I guarantee you, you know, you talk to the folks in Pimicikamak and Manitoba, the folks fighting Site C in British Columbia, all over have very similar stories because it's just the nature of these massive projects. So for instance, there's been quite an infringement on press freedom. We had journalists charged and arrested just for reporting on our resistance movement. There's issues around dam safety. There was downstream flooding. We had to rescue elders from their community at 3 a.m. in a helicopter because they're flooded. Their houses flooded suddenly because of the dam. You know, the list goes on and on. There's just really so many problems, and I'd be happy to chat more about some of the other things here later. So we can go to the next slide. So just a couple of resources, and I will gladly put this in the chat later, or if one of the tech support watching want to start, you know, linking that. We're on Facebook and Twitter at Protect Labrador. We have our fundraiser page because we're still fighting in court. And the other 4 links are just more good resources to learn more about our fight in particular, because, you know, it never hurts to learn more. So, you know, grateful for this brief moment to share my story. Happy to take any questions later, but I think I'm personally very grateful to be able to share what's happening, because I think it's important for you guys on your end to know what's happening, where that power comes from. And if you're looking to import, you know, so-called clean, you know, renewable electricity, what that really means. And the reality is that it means the devastation of Indigenous peoples and cultures. Thank you, Nakumi.
Okay, that was great. Thank you so much, Alexis and Amy. And yeah, if you have questions, go ahead and stick them in the chat. We're going to come back. We're going to circle back around in a little bit, but I think for now we're going to move to talk with Vinny Overbeek and Ninuayinu Pereira Hunikui, please.
Okay, thank you, Tamara. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for the invitation. And I will try to talk in 5 minutes, more or less, about resistance to red before giving it over to Ninawa, who will talk a little bit more about the experience in Acre, Brazil. And I will try to divide in a bit 2 parts. First, a little bit of context, because I don't know how many of you are familiar with red. And then a little bit more about some comments around resistance. So RED is, it stands for Reducing Carbon Emissions from Tropical Deforestation and Forest Degradation. And it's the main international policy instrument for tropical forest protection that we have known in the past 10, 15 years. And there have been set up about 300 RED projects and programs in tropical forest areas around Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And nowadays they are increasingly bigger programs, as big as entire states, as is the case of the state where Ninawa lives in Acre in the Amazon, in Brazil. And the idea behind RED is to protect the forest for long periods using the argument that there is carbon in the trees, so forest seen as carbon. And by protecting the forest, it will reduce the risk of deforestation and then the risk to release this carbon that could increase the global warming. So you would expect to have RED projects, especially in those areas in tropical forests with the highest deforestation, but actually most of the RED projects are in areas with little deforestation. And that's exactly because there are communities, most often indigenous communities, also other communities that have been taking care of the forest. And these RED projects and programs, they are run most often by big conservation NGOs. You probably have heard about TNC, WWF, Conservation International and others, and also governments. Well, the money comes from northern governments, from international funds, climate funds, and also from polluting industries. And these industries, they buy carbon credits from this protected forest by the RED project. So they buy the right to pollute based on a story that without the protection from the RED project, the forest would have been destroyed. And in almost all of these projects, the communities, they are considered the main threat to the forest. They are blamed for deforestation, rather than the logging industry, the mining industry, the builders of the hydropower dams that Alexis and Amy just talked about, and other infrastructure and agro-business. So the roots of deforestation. So this tremendous injustice, it means in practice that in many places, community access to forest is forbidden. Their practices in forest areas are restricted, and especially shifting cultivation, so food sovereignty tremendously threatened. And we can say now that after 15 years of RED, it has failed in all its aspects. On the grounds, communities are upset because they cannot use the forest as before. And also the idea of putting a price on forest to better protect it and create a market in carbon credits has failed. And at the same time, the tropical deforestation has only increased in the past 15 years because RED doesn't address the root causes. And at the same time, especially this year, 2020, the idea of protecting forests through conservation, preservation, it has like its momentum. Maybe you've heard about this global deal for nature that is on the table of several big conferences for biodiversity and so on. And they want to protect until 2030, something like 30% of the world's land, so 30% of protected areas. And this idea, right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's even more pushed for saying that creating more protected areas can prevent another pandemic. So the idea of forest preservation, where RED is part of, is not that, because it has become an overall failure. It has been renamed now to something really bright new thing, and they call it nature-based solutions. And again, it's pushed by the big conservation NGOs. And the last comment about the general context of RED and other offsetting initiatives in the forest, they are not that relevant if you look at the way how fast and how large scale the forest destruction has become. I live in Brazil and can see it all day. And Ninawa can also tell about that. And increasingly, they are also doing forest destruction inside protected areas. On the other hand, the capitalist interest behind this destruction. They need RED very much to give the false impressions that they are concerned about forest and that the destruction that will go on somehow will be restored. So I want to resistance very quickly to finish. I think no other top-down forest policy or project has caused more confusion among indigenous communities and organizations than RED, because its message is about conserving forest. And this is also defended, of course, by indigenous peoples. But I think also that is one reason that it has led to so much division, so much ruptures in the indigenous movement. And also the fact that a number of groups and communities, they have accepted RED. But nevertheless, the resistance on the ground so far and the capacity of a number of committed activists and groups to unmask RED as a false solution to the climate crisis, it has been effective and it has been fundamental for the victory of communities in terms of a number of RED projects that have been cancelled. And I also think that the resistance is part of the explanation to say why they changed the name of RED now in nature-based solutions, to give it a nice new sound. And I think another very important thing for the resistance is the creation of spaces in and among communities to talk about RED. Not the conversation that RED promoters are doing to make promises and to sell the project to the community, while nobody understands what RED is about, because they talk about concepts that are not known, they are not even present in languages, in cosmovishes of indigenous people. Carbon, but not even the term forest itself. So it has to be a pretty long conversation, for example, about how RED and RED promoters look at the people's living space that these RED promoters call forest, why they look in such a radically different way than the communities do, to understand the restrictions, the rules they impose, but also to understand the very close connections between these communities in the RED forest, in the forest areas, with other communities, for example, in the US, in highly polluted areas of oil refineries in California, that want to buy carbon credits from these tropical forest areas to continue polluting, or with indigenous peoples that face extractive activities in their territories in North America. So it's very important to strengthen not only the understanding of RED, but also to strengthen in that way the cross-border solidarity. And not only strengthening the resistance against RED, but also I think bordering the alliance at this particular moment of time is fundamental, and making a connection with what Tom will talk about later. There's another trend now, they call it the New Green Deal, probably have heard about it. And these people, they also talk about transition, but they are talking about something like transition to a low carbon, to a clean, to a green economy, something really beautiful, but it is extremely concerning, extremely dangerous because of the new wash that it is causing in tropical forest areas right now, and especially in those countries like Indonesia, like Brazil, like DR Congo, with very rich in minerals like nickel, lithium, cobalt, others important for the electric car batteries and so on. So to make also a link with what Amy said, is this renewable energy, it needs to be challenged, and it's one more challenge in our overall challenge to all the time try to radicalize our resistance struggles and broaden more and more our alliances. And giving the word now to Ninawa to continue. Ninawa?
Let's see if he's on mute still.
Olá, tá me ouvindo?
Ouvindo, sim.
Bom, boa tarde a todos e a todas. Aqui.
This is Dustin. Ayala, are you able to hear me? Sorry, just give us a second. We're going to take a quick break.
Ok?
Hey, this is Dustin. Ayala, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am.
Could you let Renewal know to go to the Portuguese room? Direct them there through the interpretation, and then we'll have you interpret from Portuguese to English.
Okay. I just told that to Ninawa that I'll be interpreting in English for him. Okay?
Okay, that works. Thank you.
Ok?
Okay. So,
Yes. Bom, boa tarde a todos e a todas. Meu nome é Nicoá.
good afternoon, everyone. My name is
Sou
Ninawa.
liderança da Uniquim,
I'm a
presidente da
leader of
Federação do
Uniquim.
Povo Uniquim no estado do Acre.
And I belong to the community of the Acre,
Está
Uniquim.
em 106 aldeias, hoje 12 territórios em 5 municípios
106 tribes
no estado do
and
Acre.
6 territories from Acre.
Também estamos no Peru com mais 7 comunidades, com uma
We are
população
also
de mais
in
de 3 mil.
Peru with 7 other communities.
E atualmente nós temos trabalhado muito na questão da harmonia da natureza com o povo Runicuim, no sentido
We have been
de fazer
working a
uma
lot
autoavaliação
in the issue of the harmony of the nature with Uniquim.
a natureza para a história do nosso povo, para a relação espiritual, social.
There is a very strong relation with the social and spiritual senses of the people and the community.
Desde 2010 eu tenho acompanhado
Okay, since
várias
2010 I have been following the
pelos
issues
governos do estado,
related by the state government
nacional, sobre questões ambientais.
about environmental issues.
E são sentidos totalmente oposto do que é representado para nós a natureza.
Você pode pausar um pouquinho? As pessoas estão pedindo para você pausar um pouquinho, falar pausadamente, para eu conseguir fazer a tradução. Pode ser? Então você fala e aí fala pausadamente, eu vou traduzindo o que estão pedindo aqui no chat. Tudo bem?
Tudo bem.
Okay, I just asked Ninawa to pause, yes, to take pauses for the interpretation. Thank you. He's gonna do that. Ok, pode continuar, Ninawa.
Eu tenho acompanhado as discussões sobre questões ambientais desde 2010.
I have been following the discussions about environmental issues since 2010.
E são sentidos totalmente diferentes do que representa o verdadeiro sentido da natureza relacionado com o meu povo.
Okay, so and there are issues that are completely different from the relation of my people to the nature.
Por exemplo, em 2010 foi criado a lei estadual, a lei de Cisa no Acre.
Okay, in 2010 it was passed the law Lei de Cisa, yes, in Acre.
E a lei de Cisa, ela fala de especificamente 11 ações prioritárias.
And this law talks specifically about 11 important actions.
E essas 11 ações que é apresentado pela lei de Cisa é especificamente para fazer a preservação ambiental através da da proteção das florestas, das pessoas.
And this works specifically to promote environmental preservation of people and community and nature.
Mas, infelizmente, o que está escrito na lei de CISA, ela representa especificamente na atualidade uma relação com o complexo econômico e industrial.
Okay, and this law represents the relations with complexities with politics and industrial relations.
Que tem tudo a ver com essa grande rede do complexo industrial, junto com os governos, junto com esse complexo econômico, de apenas captar recursos. Isso está muito claro.
Okay, so and it is very clear that it's pretty much connected with trying to get resources and renewable resources to the community.
E é muito importante que as pessoas compreendam, tirando o exemplo do Acre.
And it's important that people understand, leaving out the example of Acre, the place where it comes from.
O que envolve as comunidades de povos indígenas e comunidades tradicionais.
What involves the communities of indigenous people and traditional communities.
Que têm tido grandes impactos, que são impactos irreparáveis, causada pelo programa, por exemplo, de rede através das compensações que está escrita na lei de CISA.
Okay, so and these are interferences that cannot be changed, and with the RED program, it's helping to change the situation in Acre.
E exemplos bem claros no Acre, o que acontece? A lei de CISA fala que tem que se preservar a floresta, evitando derrubadas.
And CISA law establishes that it's important to stop the deforestation, yes, in the rainforest.
E o próprio governo do estado, que é executor da lei de CISA, tem um programa de manejo florestal sustentável, que de sustentável não tem nada, somente as grandes madeireiras que estão retirando árvores milenares históricas para virar comércio.
Okay, and they have a sustainable program that it's not really sustainable because some companies are cutting the woods, the trees, yes, to say it is sustainable, but it's not.
Por exemplo, nós estamos hoje passando por essa grande pandemia que já chegou dentro das comunidades indígenas.
Okay, today we are facing a pandemic that has reached the indigenous communities.
Porém, a saúde indígena no Brasil, no modo geral, na Amazônia, no Acre, nas comunidades Runicuim, ainda é muito defasada, ainda não tem uma estrutura adequada para poder dar um suporte a uma comunidade que está sofrendo de pandemia. Agora, isso também em outros casos de enfermidade que as comunidades indígenas enfrentam. E tem ações
voltadas. The communities are facing a lot of problems because of the pandemics, and we're trying to create actions that are going to solve this problem.
E o programa de RED, por exemplo, que faz a captação de recursos, fala de recursos destinados à saúde. E aonde está esse recurso neste momento?
RED programs talks about getting resources for health, but we don't know where these resources are in this moment.
Resumidamente, o povo Runicuim, os povos indígenas e comunidades tradicionais sempre foram protetores da natureza, sempre defenderam os recursos que são recursos sagrados, que é a água, que são a floresta, que são a terra, são os animais também.
So the Runicuim communities have always been land protectors. They have always protected the holy resources like water, natural resources, and things that help the nature.
E agora com a compensação ambiental que é feita,
And now with the environmental compensation, it
coloca os povos indígenas na relação de criminalidade também, porque, por exemplo, quando se acusa de que os territórios indígenas estão destruindo a natureza, causando desequilíbrio por queimada, e se colocam isso em relatórios e se divulgam, não se coloca esse mesmo relatório no agronegócio, por exemplo, que tem acabado com a natureza.
This situation criminalizes the indigenous communities because accuses them of making movements that are disruptive to the environment, like burnings and deforestation and bad things that criminalize these indigenous communities.
E se uma liderança indígena se opõe a esse projeto de rede, de compensação, ou ao complexo industrial,
if an indigenous group opposes to this RED program or to this project of industrial compensation,
é perseguido, é assassinado,
they are prosecuted and killed.
E a mesma lei de CISA do Acre hoje está escrita pelos 8 estados da Amazônia brasileira.
The CISA law is today written by the 8 states of Amazon in Brazil.
Aonde os governos da Amazônia, dos estados da Amazônia brasileira, discute entre os governos, entre as indústrias, entre as pessoas que estão compensando para os governos, mas não se discute com os povos indígenas, ou seja, não há consulta livre, prévia e informada, como é o Acordo Internacional da Convenção 69.
Okay, and these programs are discussing, but they are not, the government's not talking to the Amazon states, to the 8 Amazon states in Brazil, and they are not connecting to the community.
E os recursos que entram hoje dentro das aldeias, não é assinado um contrato de projeto de rede especificamente. O contrato é assinado diretamente com o governo que representa esses territórios.
Okay, and they don't sign the contract with the RED programs. They sign the contracts directly with the government who represents these territories, you know? And here, Winnie is adding that, I also said that the people, they do not blame the agribusiness. They blame the indigenous people for deforestation. That's why they are prosecuted and killed. And that's the CISA law. The name of the law is CISA law.
E para poder fazer isso, há também envolvimento de lideranças indígenas, que são cooptados para trabalhar dentro desses programas, mesmo que a própria comunidade, às vezes, dessas pessoas, não entende o que significa esse programa, quem é que paga por quem é que dá esse recurso para pagar por esses projetos.
And sometimes the people from the community, I use it to take part in this program, but the people, they don't know who are responsible for this program, who is paying for this, who is behind this scenario.
Para finalizar, como todos nós aqui sabemos que o projeto de rede não é a solução para amenizar o gás carbono, não é uma solução real, porque desde o Tratado de Kyoto que se vem discutindo.
So the RED program is not the solution to reduce greenhouse gases emissions, because
que se vem discutindo e até hoje não se provou em lugar nenhum desse planeta a redução da emissão de gases poluentes. Tem causado impacto diretamente com as comunidades por colocar liderança contra liderança, por cooptar lideranças, por assassinar liderança, por perseguir lideranças. E são essas as ações que está trazendo para as comunidades tradicionais e povos indígenas.
And since the Kyoto Protocol, they have been taking actions that are harming the indigenous people and doing bad things to the indigenous people. Ninawa, can you repeat? Ninawa, você pode repetir, por favor, esse final? So to finish, he would like to say that the Kyoto Protocol doesn't help the indigenous communities in Brazil. Você pode repetir, por favor, Ninawa, no final?
Sim, esses são os impactos que o programa de rede tem causado dentro das comunidades indígenas e povos tradicionais. Que é essa divisão de líderes, que é o assassinato, que é a cooptação, a perseguição. São essas as reações que estão causando dentro das comunidades.
Okay, so the RED program is causing deaths, prosecutions, yes, and divisions among the leaders of indigenous communities. So he doesn't identify it as a good thing. It's not a good thing for these communities.
Então, eu queria deixar um pouco essas contribuições e deixar uma mensagem de que nós, enquanto povos indígenas, que temos resistido esse grande complexo industrial que tem destruído a humanidade, que são os mesmos que pagam, são as mesmas empresas que estão destruindo, que estão compensando.
The same companies that are destroying the communities are also compensating these communities. So that's the message that I would like to leave here for you.
Nós vamos continuar resistindo, trabalhando a conscientização nas nossas comunidades, porque nós somos povos de espírito.
We are going to continue resisting and working on making people aware of this situation in our community, because we are spiritualized people.
E a nossa espiritualidade é uma espiritualidade sagrada, limpa, de amor, de harmonia, que luta para todos.
Something sacred and clean from out of love and harmony for the people and for the community.
E que isso não é respeitado por governos, principalmente hoje no atual governo que nós temos no Brasil, o governo Bolsonaro, o governo
by the government, especially in the government that we have in Brazil today. Bolsonaro is the government
que quer a todo custo tomar os territórios indígenas para entregar para as petroleiras, para as mineradoras, para o agronegócio, para as madeireiras. Enfim, eu queria deixar essa contribuição. Muito obrigado pela atenção de todos.
Okay, so the Bolsonaro government is trying to take indigenous lands and sell them to the enterprises, yes? And that's the message he would like to leave today, yes? And he thanks for the opportunity of speaking here for you all. Obrigada, Ninawa.
Nada. Obrigada pela tradução.
Thanks for interpreting.
E orgulhoso de você.
Oh, thank you. Obrigada, Ninoa.
Obrigada, Ninoa. Muito obrigada.
Por nada, Tâmara, Tom, Lini, todos, grande abraço.
Sim, grande abraço a você. So I was thanking Ninoa, and he was saying hello to us and thanking us and giving us all hugs. So there were a few translation bits. Sorry, the simultaneous didn't work at that moment, but you can look at some of the things that was maybe lost in the chat box. And if we can just take a minute to pause and take a deep breath. I'm gonna ask just a few questions. This is just for you to sort of journal or put in the chat, and then we'll move on from there. But it's a lot of listening. And it's important. So the chat questions have come up just for some personal reflection, some journaling, you know, especially questions around thinking about where your energy comes from if there are large mega dams in your area. Also thinking about if you're having discussions about colonialism and development and race and ethnicity in your communities or in the groups that you're working with, and how to do that. We also have some good questions coming up from people that we're going to address later in the session. So just to take a moment of reflection and take a pause for a sec, and now we'll move on. to Tom Goldtooth, who's the Executive Director of the Indigenous Environmental Network here on Turtle Island. And he's going to talk about, to answer actually some of the questions that have come up, but then what do we do? Or then how do we educate ourselves about truly grassroots solutions? And if these false green solutions are bad, then what do we do? He's going to take it and talk about the importance of both resistance and Indigenous just transition. So Tom, I will switch over to you, please.
Okay, well, thank you, Tamara, and thank you the different organizations and entities that made this this webinar possible, and especially they call themselves the techies, the technology people, and the translators, especially the translators. That's a very difficult job, and thank you for helping out. I'm glad to be on this meeting today, and yat the best legion na ashli wota kota bashishi how mitakia pi ampetu de chante washtea na petri use apedo Dakota chaze makupi Matoa Wayaka pi Hemakia Pito Dene Navajo or Southern Dene Ka Bedewa Kantawan Dakota Sioux Chanshaya Beotome Hetahan Wahito. Hello, greetings everyone. I'm calling in from northern Minnesota, and right along the border of the colonial governments of Canada and United States. I live in Minnesota, in Bemidji. I'm not far from the headwaters of the Mississippi River. If I can see the slides, are the slides up? Okay. Yeah, I'm the Executive Director of the Indigenous Environmental Network. Our foundation comes from our traditional societies, our young people, our youth, and our women societies and our elders. Our foundation is around protecting the life of our Mother Earth, the life of our people and our community. And we have to always defend our rights, our inherent rights as Indigenous peoples in the North. Here in North America, or what some of our tribes call Turtle Island. So we have a lot in common as Indigenous peoples. I think, what is it, in Canada, there's about 630 First Nations representing 50 Indigenous tribal peoples. In the state side, we're about 573 Indigenous peoples as tribes, with of that, it's about 70, 80 distinct tribal groups, and including Alaska. Next slide. We have certain principles that we developed. I'm not going to go into those, but those are the foundations of the work that we do. Being an Indigenous network, we're kind of like the center of a spokes in a wheel, and the outer part of the wheel are communities and organized organizations who are Indigenous. That provides a mechanism of accountability. And so just next slide is some more principles that we have developed, that any of our people that we hire as staff have to follow these principles. Members, they're very familiar with this principles. We don't have membership like the white man organizations, the respectful that respects the autonomy of our peoples out there. I don't know, affiliations, confederacies, like the Iroquois. You know, there's a specific indigenous language on how we relate to each other. That's part of the concepts of indigenous just transition. Next slide. Our prophecies and teachings tell us that life as we know it is in danger. I appreciate the presentations of our sisters from Canada on the hydro dam issues. I appreciate the presentations of Winnie and Ninawa, Chief Ninawa, on the issues that they are facing in Brazil. We look at things in the sacred symbolisms, the four elements of life, for an example. We look at things of the fire, the water, the earth, and the air that sustains all life. These elements of life are being destroyed and misused by the modern world that was presented just from these presenters before me. For an example, fire gives life and understanding, but it's being disrespected by technologies of the industrialized world that allows it to take life, such as the fire in the coal-fired power plants, or the toxic waste incinerators, and the fossil fuel combustion engine, and other polluting technologies that add to the concentration of greenhouse gases. And as most of you know, it's these greenhouse gases that are causing climate change, causing a changing climate with unpredictable weather events that directly affects our way of life and rights of our future generations. I travel a lot, or used to, before the coronavirus. I basically stay at home a lot. But when I traveled, I met a lot of people, our indigenous peoples that live with the land and off the land, and they see the evidence of the changing climate every day. Water is the sacredness of our life. Water and the air, we know it's being polluted. Waterways, is what was being presented earlier, are being dammed. Rivers are being dammed with large mega hydroelectric projects that are falsely classified as clean renewable energy. Life is endangered with climate fault solutions such as carbon trading, carbon offsets, carbon pricing. Climate capitalism is real right now, and it's nothing about anything. It's not about cutting emissions at source. It has nothing to do with mitigating climate change. It's all about privatization and commodification of air that's bought and sold and traded in the capitalistic market system. So these are some of the issues that we've been uplifting, including false solutions of geoengineering, techno-fixes, carbon storage, and sequestration. There was mention of the Paris Agreement earlier, 2015, even though there's a lot of promotion of that accord that was negotiated by the governments of the world. As indigenous peoples, we continue to face business as usual within our homelands here in North America, what we call Turtle Island, where dirty fossil fuel development and transportation systems such as pipelines, they're expanding. We don't see no changes. The Paris Agreement was supposed to address these issues, but we see a lot of contradictions in the Paris Agreement here at the local level. So how do we reclaim our future, and how do we change the present? In our work, we have always said, from our youth to our elders to our women's societies, we're not going to stand idle. We're not going to allow the capitalistic system to burn us all. We're going to take action. We will organize to lift our voices to the world and address the root causes of climate change by changing the system. So we've been about building movements for climate justice and community renewal, and increasing the scale of building multicultural alliances, social and environmental justice movement building. And that builds our power here in North America. So let's go to that next slide. It should demonstrate some of the mobilization in the North, but also standing with our brothers and sisters globally, because climate justice issues and the challenge of building community, it's a global issue. This was one of our indigenous groups that marched in New York City. We had 550 indigenous peoples there. Next slide. We were in Paris, in the Paris agreement, that COP21. We brought an indigenous delegation there. We stood with indigenous brothers and sisters from the global South as well. And this kind of reflects some of the language of the positions that we were elevating. Next slide. Part of the action back home, many people know about Standing Rock. And we were called in as a network by the tribe Standing Rock, Hunkpapa Lakotas, to help out. We were invited by the grassroots of Cannonball to help out. So we played a part in the mobilization of the resistance that was happening there. And all the people were doing was trying to bring attention that their traditional values, their traditional beliefs, and the way that we define our relationship to the sacredness of Mother Earth, that it must be heard, it must be recognized in the colonial system when it makes decisions. And for an example, laying pipeline of toxic oil, fracking oil. This was fracking from the hydraulic fracturing oil that was being planned to flow through these pipelines. So there was a mass mobilization that became global. Next slide. This was a winter camp. There were up to 10,000 people that came to this Ocheti Shokowi, the Seven Council Fire encampment. 10,000 people in totality. That's enough people to qualify in the state of North Dakota for our own zip code. We could have had our own post office there. There were that enough people. It was considered a small town. Next slide. So this summarizes our campaign to defend and protect our rights. That's the cornerstone of our work, is to defend the sacredness of Mother Earth. So we know what we're against, but many people ask us, you know, what are we for? What are we doing all this work for? In response, I say we've always been about building and rebuilding indigenous communities, rebuilding our villages, and building self-sustaining communities, but continuing to fight against extractive economy and all of its corporate and financial investors and governments that we call the climate criminals and perpetrators against Mother Earth, against Father Sky. So we started an initiative called the Indigenous Principles of Just Transition. This took a couple years. We went back to a lot of the notes that came out of our Protecting Mother Earth conferences since 1990. We had a lot of guidance from traditional leaders throughout all those years, and we compiled all that. What is it our people have been saying we have to do? So that's how we defined our own definition of just transition. Next slide. So this is just a slide of some of the, this is a slide of just some of the things I already talked about around just transition and the development of, took like a couple years. I said, we looked at the history of the labor movement and we looked at the relationship to the socially responsible investment work. And we did I think we did a pretty good thorough analysis of how we witnessed the evolution of the concept of just transition from the non-Indigenous perspective. And we challenged ourselves to develop our own Indigenous peoples framework. So Indigenous just transition does parallel some of mainstream just transition, and a lot of that is liberal just transition, definitely. But some of the divergences in significant areas, next slide, some of the divergences in the significant areas, especially in relationship to focusing on decolonization, addressing symptoms of internalized oppression, and coming back to our Indigenous languages, our teachings and original instructions that were given to us by the Creator and our ancestors. We found that these have to be the building block. This has to be the foundation for Indigenous trust transition. And it's about building healthy communities from a broader social, cultural, spiritual context, and job creation within an Indigenous knowledge value system. These are some of the unique things that we are developing. We have developed the principles, and now the challenge is to start having workshops and teaching circles out in Canada and United States. Next slide. Some of this is looking at some of the analysts, I guess, and the analysis on transitioning from an extractive economy to a living economy, a regenerative economy. So we're pretty critical on what that means. We say that any economy has to be respectful to the sacredness of our Mother Earth. It has to be a living economy, like my brothers and sisters of the Sariaku in Ecuador, in the rainforest. They have a campaign to protect the living forest, the spiritual part of the forest. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. And part of it is flipping some of the symbolism around to the medicine wheel, that medicine wheel concept that we have in many of our communities. And so that's what we've been doing, looking at our spiritual values and practice of our cultures, how that develops our visioning and our strategies, and how we are in our mentality, our minds, to be able to make decisions for our political and our ideological ecosystems. And our leadership, what kind of leadership do we have? Do we have the Assembly of First Nations, for those of you from Canada? Do we have a system of National Congress of American Indians that really are defined and controlled by a federal colonial system? So, you know, in the medicine wheel, how do we change that so that we can develop our own management and governance system, and then have that reaction of evaluation? Next slide. I'm going to go into final couple slides of some of the things that we are doing. And sovereignty is a core of just transition. We got to continue to do the fight. Rights is a big component, but also we recognize that for a just transition, a transformation for action, is also to spend a lot of our energy not battling in Parliament, not battling in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. Yes, we got to have a part of our foot in that. But in the meantime, we don't have healthy communities. In the meantime, we're poor. In the meantime, we don't have food. We have a lot of other issues we have to face. So the next slide. The transformation for action, these are some of the components that we have incorporated that has come from community on what they want to do. They want to build their own food systems, not just for a couple families, but community-wide, village-wide. So we also, embrace both our traditional ways of feeding ourselves, but also what are the intermediary type of technologies out there that we can bring into our communities in order to have food sovereignty. Chief Sitting Bull from our Hunkpapa Lakota, he said one time, we got to take the best of the tools of the white man, but we have to be critical on what that is. So these are the different renewable energy. What kind of renewable energy? So all these things just transition with Indigenous people. We're looking and studying of these different tools, but we're very, very critical. We got a pretty good handle on what's out there so far. Next slide. So what we've done is that we have a demonstration project and North Dakota, in the state of North Dakota, and this is where the Bakken oil field is. This is where fracking takes place. This is the source, this whole region of where fracked oil is tapped and now flows through the Dakota oil pipeline. So there's a lot of challenges in this. Next slide. Just some brief descriptions of the Mandan Hidatsa Rikara peoples is that they're right in the middle of it, hey? They're in the middle of a lot of different challenges that are going on, but they have put a vision together. They have put a vision to do some base building, a learning curve, so that the communities will understand what this is all about. Next slide. This is some of the reality, and there's still a plan to build over 1,000 more oil and gas leases. This is what's going on there now. This is what they live with. Next slide. Again, there's a lot of flaring, a lot of trucks on the roads. There's a lot of accidents. People get killed. Down in the lower picture are man camps. There's a lot of men that come in from other states. There's sexual abuse, domestic abuse of our women is rampant there. The man camps, the missing and murdered Indigenous women comes along with these kind of fossil fuel developments. Next slide. This is some artwork by one of our artists of what takes place in those at Fort Berthold. Next. So how do we build power? How do we implement Indigenous just transition based upon what I said? How do we implement that in a community that's already enraged, in a community that's already facing the reality of getting sick and dying? How do we continue to fight the fight of pushing out the industry, but at the same time building community, building pride, cultural and spiritual resiliency, just transition for change? Next slide. So part of that community there, they're an agricultural community. Their traditional seeds, they still have the corn seeds. A lot of their land has been flooded. There's been mention of hydroelectric dam. This is one of the sad situations of the US government energy policy that flooded the bottom land of these indigenous peoples, flooded their bottom land, their rich soils. So their way of living was devastated, but they're bringing it back now. Next slide. And using technologies, they live where sometimes in the wintertime, it goes to wind chill 60 below 0 Fahrenheit, 60 below 0 Fahrenheit in the wintertime. The winds are, you know, they're cruel. I've been there many times, but they are starting to use greenhouses and experimentation. I've been in one of the greenhouses where it's humid. I sweat when I go in there and it's 20 below Fahrenheit outside in the snow. Next slide. And building the circle is important. Next slide. Part of it is building daycare center, building a health center. The spiritual foundation is the sweat lodge for the people here. It is the lodges. So this shows the centerness of the spirituality. Next. And the Earth Lodge is the center. We have helped the community to purchase the logs that will come from Minnesota that will help build a 60-foot diameter Earth Lodge. That's the center of organization for the indigenous peoples here. So and it's in that center construction that all community development will flow from. Next. Renewable energy, clean, renewable energy. This is a microgrid. This is where the energy is generated within the community. And it's up to the community if they want to sell that energy into the colonial federal electrical grid system, but that's their decision. This is enough energy being generated in a microgrid system for the communities themselves. Next slide. In the wintertime, definitely in this case where it gets cold, sometimes it gets cloudy, and so they will be using the pellets wood system. So that's the end of my presentation of what we are doing around Indigenous just transition and building, rebuilding our communities, helping them with funding mechanisms. It's very much needed as part of Indigenous Rising. That links the importance of relearning language for those communities that have lost language, and also lifting up the importance of knowing who we are, the spiritual teachings, the original instructions. Assimilation and acculturation has been very strong in the North, where Indigenous peoples have lost a lot of this as colonial policy. So this is part of what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Tom, for sharing with us the wealth of your knowledge, and thank you to all of our previous speakers for doing so as well. So we just want to take a moment for you to just check in with your body. And so if you can just check in with your body and see what needs a little TLC. Mine is my shoulders, where I hold a lot of tension. So I'm just gonna roll mine back. And maybe your neck needs to be moved from side to side. You need to stand up, whatever you need to do in this moment. I'm just gonna give you a few moments to do that. And we are also just going to take a moment to give the interpreters a break. So if we could just take a moment You could use this time to get some water or whatever you need before we start our strategy clinic portion. So. All right. So as we continue, we are going to move into the strategy clinic portion. And this is where you get to engage with each other around the amazing information that our presenter shared with us today. And so if you can just quickly show the slide with the ground rules. So I'm just going to read them out loud. There we go. So ensure that everyone is actively participating, either by listening or speaking. There is a one mic rule. Don't talk over each other is essentially what that means. If you do not understand something, ask for clarification. When in doubt, default to trust, compassion, and solidarity. And we would love for each group that you designate a note taker to document the highlights of your discussion that you have in your breakout groups. And so the way this is going to work, we're going to split up into breakout groups. Everyone that is needing Portuguese interpretation will be put together, and then the rest of the speakers will be split up throughout the rest of the groups. And if you can go to the next slide, these are the questions that we would like you to consider. And so if we can go ahead and drop the link to the slides in the chat so that the note taker could have access to them, that would be great. And again, everything that has been populated, the recording, the slides will be sent to you along with any other resources from our presenters for you to engage more deeply on your own about what was presented. And so you will get a notification that the breakout rooms are ready, and you just click the accept button. And again, these are the questions that we want you to consider, and you can access them by clicking on the link that our tech support will put in the chat. And as you begin to get your notification, you can please join, and our TSL will broadcast a message as the time is winding down.
So the folks left in this room should be the breakout room with the interpreters in here.
I don't need Portuguese. Is that what you mean, Dustin?
You are a part of this breakout group. So
sure, it's great.
There's a mixture of people here, both participants and speakers. And so you will be participating in this group. And
No,
so,
it's great. I do speak Spanish and some Portuguese. So thank you.
So if you can, this is just a time for you all to consider the guiding questions. And so this is a self-guided group, and everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner. So I'm going to leave you to it so you all can start your discussion.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marisa. I think...
Hola, Marisa.
Hola.
Tudo bom?
Obrigada.
Sim, vamos a falar em português en este grupo, o portuñol, para mim. Pois, não sei se vocês querem compartilhar um pouquinho de onde estão, se você quer falar sobre estas perguntas.
As a closing, we just would like to let you know that this series is continuing. The next session will be on July 9th. And this session will focus on climate justice and community renewal in the African context. And so we have an amazing lineup of speakers for that as well. And so we just invite you to stay engaged because we have a lot of new programming coming up the summer heading into the fall. And we just would love for you to stay connected with us and build this hub of learning and sharing together that is so, so needed in this time. So again, thank you to all of our presenters and sponsors who made this day happen. Thank you to Tamara and Brian for such an amazing book and bringing together some amazing warriors for the rights of the earth and each other. And so you will receive a follow-up letter that will include a discount code for the book. Please purchase it, and you will receive the slides as well as any answers to any questions that haven't been answered in the chat. And you all have a great day, and we appreciate you for joining us. So thank you.
Feel free to come off mute if you'd like and say goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Ayala, and the interpreters.
so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Tamara
Okay,
and all the
Hat.
speakers.
Okay, Hat.
Obrigada, Ninoa.
Thank you.
Hey,
Hey,
obrigada, muito,
Sai,
muito
there you are.
boa, Verto Cara.
Thank you, Amy.
Vini, obrigada, muito obrigada, Vini, para este capítulo muito bom.
Obrigado você.